Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Truth and Taxation meeting for December 4th, 2025. We'll call the meeting to order.
Mayor, Council, members of the public in attendance and on TV, this is the annual public informational hearing on the 2026 budget and tax levy. For those of you in attendance, I hope you got the copies that we handed out, but the copy of this presentation is available. And anybody who's watching on TV, if they email us, we'll give them a copy of this presentation as well. So I'll spend roughly probably 45 minutes going through the various different aspects of our budget and tax levy, and then we'll open it up for any public questions or comments. And that should kind of take care of that for tonight. So with that, as usual, this is kind of our agenda for tonight. We'll talk about the budget process to date. We'll go through some general truth and taxation hearing information. We'll take a look at how we compare to other cities, both in our area and regional centers. I'll touch on a little bit of just property taxation 101. Then we'll get into more details on the tax levy and general fund budget. We'll spend just a brief time talking about our enterprise fund budgets, our capital improvement and debt management plan, and then just kind of have a conclusion summary of this kind of whole hearing, and then talk about our next steps. So the budget process to date, City Council and staff have had 4 public work sessions over the past 7 months, with our first work session taking place on May 27th, and the last one taking place early last month on November 12th. City Council adopted the preliminary budget and tax levy in September, and the truth and taxation notices were mailed out to all city property owners last month. The main purpose of this hearing is to enhance the public participation in the property tax system by allowing a public forum to discuss the budget, discuss the proposed tax levy, explain budget and tax levy increases, and then hear any public comments and questions on the budget and tax levy. I suppose before getting any further, for those of you who maybe don't know who I am, I'm Matt Yannick, the city administrator. With me is Andy Reed, our finance director. 2 of us together will take team to answer any questions the public may have on our proposed budget and tax levy. Tonight is the truth and taxation hearing. If there is a need for a continuation of this hearing, it'll take place on next Tuesday at 5:30. And then the final budget and tax levy will be adopted at our second council meeting in December, which is Tuesday, December 23rd. I always like to point out that most of this data is from the city of Hutchinson, unless noted. I usually try to note that on the slides that we present if it comes from a different source. Just a reminder, tonight we discussed the city's share of your total 2026 proposed tax bill, not property valuations. And I say that every year because I think this is year 23 or 24, and usually people show up to talk about property valuations. And so I think from last year I learned, if you have your tax bill in front of you, if you're looking at it at home, what we are talking about is the city's portion. If you're not familiar, there's in this tax statement, there's 5 different levels. You have state general tax, the county portion of your tax bill, the school district portion of your tax bill, and then special taxing districts. In Hutchinson, that includes, I think, Region 5, the EDA and HRA. So we do have a little bit of say on the EDA and HRA, and so that's why I kind of highlighted that portion of it. Otherwise, the main portion of what we're discussing tonight is the city's portion of your tax bill that you received in the mail. A lot of times people think that we are responsible for the total tax bill, of which we are not. You have the school district, the county, and there's other taxing districts as a part of that. Also, a lot of times we have conversations or questions gets raised about valuation. Once again, if you're here to talk about your evaluation, that should be done in the spring at the open book forum. Once again, the portion of the meeting tonight is to talk about the budget and the tax levy. So sometimes I thought it'd be a little bit easier just to show a tax bill that you received in the mail so they have a better understanding of exactly what we're addressing tonight. Once again, it's that middle portion of the bill. That's the city's portion that we're directly responsible for setting. I always like to include this calendar. I think it's helpful for the public on the different times of the year when you can address maybe some of your concerns, whether it's valuation or your property taxes. And I always do like to spend just a little bit of time talking about property valuation because it does come up as a question here. But in Minnesota, the market value of a property is determined by January 2nd of the year prior to the year in which taxes on that property are due. In other words, market values for taxes payable in 2026 were set in January of 2025. So property values and statements recently received are based off of home sales from October of 23 to September of 2024. Once again, that's how valuations are determined based off of sales that occur within a community. The state has guidelines on where those valuations need to fall as a result of what sales are within a specific community. Property owners will receive new notices on market values from the assessor in March or April of 2026. Questions on those evaluations should be addressed at the open book meeting at the county, which usually takes place in May or June. So it's just kind of a reminder, if you have concerns on your evaluations, that's the appropriate time to address those concerns. The city doesn't have any say on the establishment of values. That's handled by the county and the county assessor's office. With that being said, I know questions come up on why are home values going up. This is just kind of a graph over the last 10 plus years of what values have been. This has a direct correlation on what we're seeing for sales within the community. And so I think if I would extend this graph back, I think since about 2010, 2011, we've seen a steady increase in home values within the community. One thing to point out, 2025 right now, that's our estimate based off of sales to date, and that's based off of the Minneapolis area realtors. That number usually comes down at the end of the year because we have full numbers from the county that take into account closed sales and forfeiture, share sales, things like that the Realtors Association doesn't have. But that gives you an idea of what we've seen for home value increases over the last 10 plus years. So before we kind of get into maybe more of the meat and potatoes of the tax levy, the preliminary tax levy that was sent in September and the property tax effect, the statement that you got in the mail, showed a city tax increase of 9.2%. And at that time, the preliminary budget was balanced. The budget and the tax levy that we're going to be talking about tonight has been revised since September. It includes a 6.9% tax levy increase and a balanced budget. So since September, the city has adjusted its revenue and expense projections and eliminated just over $214,000 in taxes since the preliminary budget was adopted in September, and that's what's being proposed as a final budget and what's being discussed tonight at this hearing. Before we kind of jump into our actual numbers, I always like to just do a brief comparison, and I always like just to kind of preface this that every city is different. Every city's needs are different, but we try to at least, questions come up all the time on why are the city of Hutchinson's taxes the highest in the area? And so to try to be fair to that statement, we like to at least show comparisons on what our tax rate is. The tax rate is what establishes the property or what your property taxes are. And so when we look at McLeod County as a whole, we have the second lowest tax rate within the county. We have up there what the impacts of this budget will do to that tax rate, both from the preliminary standpoint and what we're looking at tonight is the proposed. Then we look at outstate regional centers. There's 19 that we've identified that are kind of similar in size and services that are delivered. Once again, not every one of these cities are the same, but it's just a comparison. And when it compares to outstate regional centers, we actually have moved up. We're now the 8th lowest out of those regional centers that we compare ourselves to. Last year we were 10th. Back in 2015, I think when I started doing this comparisons, we were about 15th or 16th. And so our tax rate has actually declined over the last 10 years to the level that we're at. So you can see where we're at in 2025 in comparison to our other outstate regional centers, what's being proposed, and the impact that will have on it, what that regional center average. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find the statewide average for 2015 yet, and so I still have 2024's number up there for comparisons. And so usually what I like to say is that we're kind of middle of the pack when it comes to the municipal tax rate that we set within the state. So in the county, we're on the low side. Our regional comparisons, we're kind of in the middle of the pack. And when you take a look at the statewide average of municipal cities throughout the state, we're a little bit lower than what that average is. Once again, that source comes from the Department of Revenue. Couple other things I'd like to highlight at this point is just things that we tracked when it comes to our population below the poverty level. We're the fourth lowest of those outstate regional centers. We have the third highest median household income. That has an impact on things like local government aid and other factors. Our median home value is the fifth highest of those outstate regional centers. Once again, that plays into a newer housing stock, which also has an impact on our local government aid payment, which is the third lowest of the outstate regional centers. And just as we look at the preliminary numbers statewide, the average city tax increase was 8.7% based off of the preliminary levies that were set in September. All taxing districts are looking at a 6.9%, so that includes the county, school districts, townships, special taxing districts. When I went back and looked at last year's, so from the preliminary that was set to the final, I think that average decreased by about 0.75%. So most likely that those numbers are going to come down when the final levies are set here in December, but that's kind of where we're at come November, December of 2025, looking at 2026. One of the things that we started doing several years ago was looking at a price of government for the city of Hutchinson, and essentially what that does is it's a combination of, okay, for the average resident in Hutchinson, what you are paying for your property taxes along with your utility bills, and how does that compare to the average estimated family income. So roughly, was it 2.5 cents of every dollar is getting spent on local government services here in Hutchinson. That's on average. That's not going to necessarily be the same for everybody, and that's declined over the years. You can see we kind of peaked in 2010 at about 3.6 cents per dollar. And we've been pretty steady now the last 5-6 years. Just to talk about property taxes, I think it's an important thing to highlight that property taxes vary from year to year, and it can be one of 14 different reasons. We have 3 specific reasons that we focus on here. That's the city budget that we establish and the tax levy that we set, any special assessments that we're responsible for, and then special districts. That would include the EDA and the HRA in our case. But once again, there's 14 other reasons depending on, or there could be up to 14 different reasons on why your property taxes increased or changed from one year to the next. And always just like to highlight that. Talking about property taxation is not an easy thing. It's a complicated thing. We don't have an easy system, especially here in Minnesota. But there's really 5 components. One is the local property tax levy. That's what we are responsible for, at least when it comes to the city. There are property tax classifications that range from 0.25% to 2%. So your property may get taxed at a higher rate than someone else's depending on the type of property that it is. Now, most of us, if we own residential, you're going to get taxed at the same rate of 1%. Again, the same tax classification of 1%. Now, the 1.5% to 2% is most likely an industry or commercial type of business, and the 0.25 to 0.5% I think is agriculture, but there's about 30 different classifications. So depending on the property that you have. Your property value has a large impact. A lot of times when I had a call a couple weeks ago, somebody said, hey, my taxes went up, doubled from last year. What is the city doing that my property taxes? And I asked them, what did your property value do? Their property value increased to $180,000. And they went on to explain to me, oh, well, when they valued our house the previous year, we were in the middle of construction. And I said, most likely, you finished construction, they've now assessed the full value of your property. And so a lot of times I ask residents, take a look at the value on your statement, because that could have a huge impact on the property tax that you're paying. If you saw a huge or large increase in your value, that would have a direct impact on your payment. Some properties have tax credits. That's mainly your commercial, industrial, and then some properties have a state general tax. Most residential properties do not have a state general tax, and that's set by the state. This gets in the weeds a little bit, but there is a way to determine the actual tax rate that the city sets. That's our total tax levy divided by the total tax capacity. The tax capacity is a combination of all the value within the community, and so What I want to do is be able to provide that updated tax rate based off of the changes that we made since September, so somebody can actually calculate what their individual city tax will be with those changes based off of that formula. And I'll just use this for an example. So you should be able to see on your statement what your home value is minus that homestead exclusion, and then your partial class rate, which if it's a residential property, it's 1%, and that kind of gives you an idea. So in this example, a home valued at $275,000 is going to have a municipal city tax of about $1,490 based off of the property tax that we're proposing to pass. And I just put two other cities in that same home would pay about $1,700, just over $1,700 in Glencoe, and that same home would pay over just over $1,800 in Winston. So in regards to that, I'd like to show this graph. The column on the right is what we were looking at with our preliminary tax levy that was set in September. The column that's highlighted in green is what's being proposed tonight as a final budget and tax levy. So we were looking at a total increase in September of 9.2%. On a home valued at $275, you're looking at about a municipal impact of about $92 a year is what that tax levy increase would account for. What's being discussed tonight is a budget with a tax levy increase of 6.9%. At a home value of $275, that you're looking at about a $60 increase in your city property tax for next year based off of those changes. So roughly $32. Go ahead, Tim.
I had somebody ask me the other day, if you refinance your home, do they reassess based on the refinancing if you take out like a home equity?
The only way they would do that is if they would give that new value to the county assessor's office. And if they would make an adjustment. I can say personally, somebody who refinanced my home a couple of years ago, it had no impact on my tax value.
Okay.
So, Andy, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Well, I think you get some improvements that it would give to the county, but yeah, I think like Matt said, if the bank doesn't tell the county will know.
Yeah. And I will say this, the value used for financing is usually never close to what the taxable value is. It's usually higher than what the taxable value is of that property.
Yeah, and that was their concern. I refinanced,
Yeah.
I got more money, my property value was a little bit enhanced. Are they now taxing me on that?
I would like to say no. I don't know of a case that's happened, but
I told them to call the county.
yeah.
You can call their assessor's office and ask.
I would say if it went up, maybe don't. But
A general question without a name.
they're going to use, once again, it's going to be based off of property sales that take place within the community. And then if you've done any improvement to your home. So that's why I said I feel 99% certain that would not have an impact on their tax levy, a refinance.
Perfect, thank you.
I do like to highlight the homestead exclusion. This is the state's program that does give kind of a property tax rebate to property homeowners. And so essentially what it does is that, as we've talked about, your home may be valued at $275,000, but with this homestead exclusion, you're only being taxed at $253,000. That's the state's program to give property tax relief to residential properties. Now, as your value increases, that exclusion or that benefit goes down. Now they made some changes, was it last year, where they increased those numbers, which allows people with higher values to have more of if you want to call it a property tax rebate. One thing I do want to be careful with is what that does is then spread the burden to non-residential properties. And so while it does reduce the value of a residential, it also reduces our tax capacity, which inadvertently would reduce or would increase our tax rate. And so just keep that in mind. And so in one sense, it is helping with the direct payment, but it's also decreasing our tax payment. And so if we're not so if our tax levy is outpacing our tax capacity, that's when you're going to see increases in our tax rates, and that's what we've seen in the last 2 years and what we'll show you here in a little bit as well. This is just a graph that shows the value of the community. We've had significant growth in the community over the last 10 roughly 10 years, that just kind of shows you that value increase. Once again, that all plays a part in the tax burden and the tax rates. And so it's a double-edged sword, right? If your value goes up, that's good for you. If you're looking to sell your home, you can get more for it, but it also puts you at a higher tax rate because the value of your home, it helps determine what your property tax is going to be. But if the value in the community expands, now that bag that we use for that tax money expands as well, and that lessens the load throughout the entire community. And so what we like to try to do is see more growth in commercial and industrial. To be honest, we are a heavily residential growth community. I think 75% of our value is in residential. And so that's where a lot of the burden goes when we are looking to set levies and increase levies is on residential, because so much of our population is based on a residential value. This is just another graph that kind of breaks that down, the growth that we've seen over the years. You can see that, this level here in residential shows you that large value increase. Specifically in 21 and 22, we saw a significant increase in home values in town. Now that's shrunk a little bit this past year. We saw a larger increase in the commercial industrial. 2023 and 2021, we saw large increases in values in apartments. If you think back to those times, that's when we had significant growth in new apartments. So 2021 was after the Highfield apartments went up. 2023 was after the Century Court townhomes went up. And so you can see where you've got some of that value that's been infused into the community. Like I said, and I highlighted this when I had you kind of look at your tax bill at the very beginning. But just a reminder that tax bill that you get in the mail is not 100% the responsibility of the city. And so what we like to do is just kind of show you a graph that shows what your tax bill looked like in 24, what it looked like in 25. We don't have 26 yet because final numbers haven't been approved. But for the most part, these numbers have stayed relatively the same. So when you get your tax bill in the mail, roughly 38% of that is the city's portion of it. About 32% is the county's portion, and my quick math, it's about 28% of that is your school district's portion of that bill, and then 2% goes to the HRA, EDA, and I think Region 5. I don't think we have a watershed, or maybe a watershed. So that's kind of some of the background. We'll get more into the details of the levy and the general fund for next year. I always like to highlight our mission statement. I think it's important to do that because I would like to think that all of the decisions that we make at the city, specifically when it comes to a budget, is based off of that mission statement, and then there's 7 core areas of focus. So when we are establishing budgets, we have these 7 areas in mind. So if anybody has a question on why you're doing what you're doing, the council has set these areas as areas of focus. So we want to spend our money on public safety, health and recreation, transportation, economic development, environment, good government, and housing. And so I think every aspect of our budget falls into one of those 7 areas. So as we look at our tax levy for 2026, once again, this is with updates in September. You're looking at your general fund. That is the main operations of the city. So that's your fire, police, planning and zoning, legal, administration, finance. That all falls under what we would consider general fund, along with park and rec. We're proposing an 8.6% increase in the general fund from 6.7 million to just over 7.2 million. Our tax abatement, you may recall, this was for Uponor. When we recruited them to town, we did have a tax abatement incentive, and that's at $25,000 a year. And that stayed pretty consistent since that was adopted back in, was that 17 or 18? We're required by law to show that when we have this public hearing. That's why it's separated out for the public. And then our debt funds, we're looking at a 2.5% increase. That's the debt the city carries to help cover road improvements, the police station, and any other facilities that we may have. Most of it is our street improvement projects that we do in a given year. Like I said, we don't necessarily have a direct impact on setting the EDA and HRA levies, but as subsidiaries more or less of the city, we do have to bless their requests. And so I always like to highlight that those boards are setting those budgets and levies on their own. The council does have to give a blessing. And so as a part of this, the EDA is looking at a 1.7% increase, which I think is the max amount allowed by state statute based off of the value increases. And the HRA is looking at a 1.8% tax levy increase. So if you combine the city's proposed tax levy increase and the special districts, the total impact that the council has some sort of say on is about a 6.7% increase from 2025 to 2026. Always like to highlight, these are, people may ask, say, what is the debt you are covering? These are the various different debts that we're covering. I think when we look at the bond issuance from 14 to 25, those are all road, street improvement projects. And this is our police facility debt that we took out in 2023. 24, 21, 22. So that's what that debt levy is going to help pay for, is the debt associated with those projects and those facilities. This is just a graph kind of showing our tax levy comparison since 2018. I think on average it's about, let me get my notes here. Average increase has been about 3.9% since 2016. And about 4.2% since 2018. So really, when you look at this graph, the average increase over this time period is 4.2%. The city has looked at, or the city has established for tax levy increases during that time. The proposed 2026 tax levy includes the 11th straight year of an increase in the general fund portion of the levy. The proposed 2026 tax levy includes the 5th straight year of an increase to our debt fund portion of it. Compared to 2026, the total tax levy has increased by 46.5%, and that's an average of 3.9% per year. Per capita, so if we were to tax every individual in town, it went up from $656 in 2025 to $696. That's being proposed in 2026. I shared this a little bit previously, but the city's growth in tax capacity has slowed down, increasing the pressure on tax rates. This will be the third time that the tax levy outpaces the tax capacity in 11 years, resulting in a likely increase in our city tax rate. The 2026 tax rate is expected to be 2.3% higher than the 2025 tax rate. This will be a third consecutive year in which the tax rate has increased since 2014. As we shared previously, median home value would see about a $60 increase. That's a home that's valued at $275,000. A property possibly might not see a city tax increase if their value does not increase at the same rate as the median home value, or its value decreases. And so there is possibilities that if your home didn't grow in value as fast as others, or if it actually decreased, which it can happen, that you may actually see your property tax remain flat or see a decrease in your municipal portion of the tax levy. So I always encourage everybody, take a look at your statement. You can see what the direct impact of what the city is doing on your home in regards to our budget and tax levy. This is our 10-year trend in the tax rate. This plays back into even that comparison of those other regional centers. You can see I think we had 10 or 11 straight years where our tax rate went down. Last couple of years, once again, we've set a tax levy at a higher rate than what we're seeing for value growth, and so those tax rates have started to climb back up. So looking at our proposed 2026 general fund revenues compared to our 2025 revenues, once again, the 7.3 million shows what's being proposed for general fund tax increases. Other taxes remain the same. Our other taxes in town is we have lodging tax. So all of the hotels in town pay a tax for the beds that get used, and then we have cable TV franchise tax. And so that's what that other tax is going into. One thing to keep in mind that the cable franchise tax, that helps pay for HCVN, and the bedding tax, the lodging tax goes to the chamber of, or the tourism portion of the Chamber of Commerce. And so I think we collect about 5% fee to administer those, but those are, so that 320 that we're collecting basically turns around and gets passed off to the HCVN and the Convention and Visitors Bureau portion of the chamber. We're looking at a 10% increase in licenses and permits. A lot of that has to do with factoring in account. We have increased some of our fees. That was a request of the city council to have users pay for more, but also things like cannabis, chickens, not a ton of that. But we've factored in those new licenses into those increased fees as well. Intergovernmental revenue, that's things like state aid, local government aid, that's remaining relatively flat for next year. Charges for service is going up about 7%. This is if you're going to use the rec center, the ice arena, the pool, we're charging more to our users to use those facilities. Once again, that was a direction from the city council, and so that's been factored into the proposed revenue for next year. Fines and forfeitures, that remains relatively same. That falls into Mark's. We don't have any edicts on him on what we want when it comes to the legal side of things, but that doesn't change a whole lot. Our miscellaneous revenue, a lot of that might be interest revenue that we have from our money that's being invested, along with sponsorships and reimbursements of certain things. That has a slight increase for next year. And then the transfer in, this is the money that we get from Liquor Hutch Utilities, Creekside, and then there's a portion of our water and sewer fees that get transferred into our general fund to help account for the work that Andy and his team do, that I do, that the legal does to help pay for kind of that portion of our enterprise funds. But so when people ask, roughly about 2.8 million gets transferred into our general fund from, like I said, Creekside, Liquor Hutch, Hutch Utilities. Those are the three biggest contributors to our general fund when we look at those transfer ends. Kind of put that to a graph. Roughly 44% of the revenue that we take in is from property taxes that help pay for our general fund. With the next largest being about 18% from charges for services, 17% that's that transfer I just talked about, and then about 13% of our general fund comes from state aid, whether that's our not real shacks, but our roadway reimbursements that we may get, whether it's pension funds or local government aid, that's the reimbursement that we get from the state. So that covers about 13% of our general fund operations. Some additional facts on the general fund revenues. General fund revenues include an 8.6% tax levy increase. About 44% of the general fund is covered by property taxes. I think this is our second straight year of no increase in the pilot payment. Third straight year of no increase in the pilot payment from Hutch Utilities, but we do have an increase in reimbursement rates for legal and IT. We provide them legal and IT services, and so we've charged them additional fees for those costs. So we have minimal increase in LGA. I think it was about 8,000. We split that between our capital fund and our general fund. And then the fire and police pension aids had a pretty decent increase, but once again, that gets put into those pension funds. We have a slight increase in building permit fees. This year we had a better than anticipated construction season, and we're expecting that to continue next year with taking into account the new apartment complex, potentially a second apartment complex, and maybe even the hotel project. So that's all factored into some of those additional revenues. Just over $200,000 in charges for service. So that's various park and rec user fee increases. We increased our fees for the school liaison program. We talked about IT and legal to Hutch Utilities, and so we really, that was really one of the directions from the city council, is having those pay, if you want to say, a fair share of the services they're using from the city. And then we did increase the contribution from our general fund from the water, sewer, and compost funds by about $50,000. So this just kind of breaks down those transfers I talked about previously. The liquor fund transfers $550,000 of their profits into our general fund every year. Creekside's up to $125,000. Water and sewer, $245,000, and then Hutch Utility is just over $1.9 9 million, but that's the equivalent, and if we were to get rid of all of that, we'd have to increase our taxes by 42% to replace that revenue, or decrease expenses by 42%, so roughly 42%. A 1% tax levy increase to the general fund is equivalent to about just over $67,000. Next, we'll jump into our general fund expenses. Our largest expense within our general fund, to the tune of about 68%, is wages and benefits of our employees. I shared from time to time, we are a people industry. We don't have gadgets or machines. It's the people that do the work for the city of Hutchinson, so that is our largest expense. We're looking at a 6.4% increase in wages and benefits. A good portion of that is due to anticipated performance increases. But we also have in that budget a new IT position, some changes within our engineering department that increased some fees, and then there was a budget mistake made last year for a position that we budgeted in 2024 but was not included in the 2025 budget in our park and rec, and that was included in this year's budget. Supplies, we're looking at a 4% increase on that of about $50,000. Some of that is just some increase in needs of, I think, maintenance stuff. Where's that in our services and charges?
This is more park and rec
Equipment, that's right, yeah. We were replacing some outdated equipment within our park and rec department. Service and charges going up about 5%. That's about $150,000, and that is repair and maintenance needs, mainly within our park and rec department. Looking at things like the ice arena, aquatic center, rec center are factored into that increased supply. Transfer out, that's our portion for the HATS facility. That's the joint co-op that we have with county and the state. And then we have some increased fleet funding as well that we've factored into the general fund portion to the tune of about $25,000. Taking a look at, people want to know, okay, what is my tax dollars being spent on? And we've got a 2025 pie and a 2026 pie. These numbers don't change a whole lot. So of that tax levy, roughly 35% is going to pay for public safety. About 23% is culture and recreation. That's everything from our libraries to our ice arena, rec center. General government's 26%. That's mainly everybody that's positioned here at City Center, and then streets and highway is 14%. A lot of times people may say you're only spending 14% of your general fund on streets and highways. I would just caution everybody and say, but we're spending about 50% of our capital budget on streets and sidewalks. And so a lot of the major expenses for streets and sidewalks come out of our capital fund, and so not necessarily our general fund. But those numbers stay relatively the same from year to year. They may go up, 0.5% or a couple percentage points, but nothing significant. This is our general fund budget history over the last 12, 13 years. One thing to point out was that in 2010, this was after the Great Recession, the city had cut back significantly on a lot of its staffing and a lot of the services. And then probably starting in 15 and 16, the council started adding those services back into the budget. So I think that's one thing we lose sight of, is that when we went into the Great Recession, we cut a lot of services. Then there was a lot of pushback from the residents to bring those services back. And so you saw that in 16, 17, and 18, which is kind of brought us back to where the levels of where we were at prior to probably the Great Recession in 2010. One thing new this year, this was requested by Councilman Burley, but I think it's important to share to the public. So if you can't see it on TV, I would encourage you to come and pick this up, is that we laid out every one of the functions of our general fund to show, okay, how much of that is being covered by fees, how much of those services are being covered by fees, how much of those are being covered by taxes, and how much of those are being covered by local government aid or another source. And so for every single one of the departments within our general fund, we have laid that out. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but just to kind of highlight some things. Things like administration, elections, mayor and the council, there's no fees that we charge to do those services. So that's covered 100% by property taxes or the LGA allocation that we put into our general fund. Our DMV, so 94% of its operations are covered by fees that they collect. There's a small portion that we cover for that, just to highlight some of that. Police department, 11% of their revenue is collected by fees. Fire, 26%. Some of that has to do with the rural townships that they provide coverage to. Building inspections. So when we're going out and we're inspecting properties, about 93% of those fees. So when people are paying for building permit fees, about 93% of that is covering the inspection services that we're providing. This kind of breaks down more of our kind of park and rec, and so I'll just point out, I don't want to go through each and every one, but something like the ice arena, about 83% of the ice arena is covered by fees that are collected from the users within that. And then you can look at things like the senior center, about 32% of that is covered by fees. The water parks, about 54% of that. And so if people want to know, okay, how much is my tax dollars going to help provide these services, I think these last 2 pages kind of do a good job of trying to highlight that. And then you've got Cemetery Airport. So in total, we're looking at about 28% of our fees. This gets into, as we shared before, 44%. As you remember, if you looked at that graph, is getting covered by property taxes. So some additional facts on your general fund expenses. Wages and benefits increased is really the biggest impact in our general fund. It's just over $676,000. That includes costs for general performance increases, union impacts, staff timing, allocation changes, and minor shifts. Part of that is a 14% increase in our health insurance. This is the big talker day, but the Minnesota Paid Family Medical Leave, that's going to cost the city just over $30,000 next year in expenses. It does include the new IT position that we're looking. Part of that request is I don't think any of us are surprised by just how much equipment that is in today's society, how much dangers there are. If you recall, I think it was Minneapolis this past year, St. Paul, that was attacked. It was just realizing the need to beef up some of our security there. And then these are the other changes. So this was a position that was approved in 2024 and budgeted, and then it was actually only left out of 2025. And then some of those changes. And so it's really these 3 things that would be the added to the budget for 2026, and doesn't include general performance increases. As I noted, roughly 68% of our general fund pays for wages and benefits. That's by far our largest expense. Increase of just over $62,000 in operating supplies. That's to replace outdated equipment at Park and Rec. So I think stuff like football pads, our volleyball nets, so things that have reached their useful life that are in need of being replaced. The contractual, just over $130,000 in contractual R&M for needed improvements at the aquatic center and the ice rink. Talk about additional $25,000 for fleet funding or in the general fund. And once again, the budget that we're talking about tonight is currently balanced with expenses and revenues. Always like to spend a little bit of time touching on the enterprise funds. I think it's important for the public to know how those funds are doing, but I do want to reiterate, there are no tax dollars that go in to help fund these different funds. So there are no tax dollars that help support the liquor fund or the liquor store. There's no tax dollars that help support Creekside. There are no tax dollars that help support the garbage service that we provide in town. And there's no tax dollars that help support the water or the wastewater or other stormwater services. Those are all covered by fees that we are charging. So in regards to the liquor store, when you're going in and buying your product, that's helping to pay for all the wages and the benefits, facility improvements that are needed. And oh, by the way, $550,000 of that then comes back to the general fund of the city. Compost, that's Creekside, that's the $125,000 that's coming back to the city. Garbage, obviously the garbage rates you're paying, and then water, wastewater, and stormwater are all paying for those various different funds. And so a lot of you may look at this and you may see that expenses are higher than revenue. Some of that is the accounting standards that we are required to do. We don't budget for depreciation, but we have to show that when we're providing these funds to you. And so I think the important thing is to look at the cash balances and the cash flows. And if you look at that, they're all projected to see positive cash flows next year. And in some cases, when we had negative, like last year, some of that is because we're doing some improvements at those facilities, and we're using the cash to pay for those improvements. But going through this liquor store, they're after the transfer to the general fund, they're looking to have a cash flow of just over $56,000. Compost, that's Creekside. The garbage, just over $14,000. That plays into why we're looking to have to raise rates on that. Then water, wastewater, and our stormwater are all. Stormwater, that helps pay for the various different ponds that we're required to maintain throughout the city, along just with our stormwater infrastructure that's within our street system. So some additional facts in your price fund: Liquor Hutch and Creekside continue to do well and will contribute $675,000 to the general fund in 2026. This budget includes a 5% increase in our garbage rates. This is the year 3 of potentially 5 rate increases since 2008. And we've talked about this through the budget process. One of the biggest needs for that rate increase is the use of our spring and fall cleanup and how much those costs are costing rate users. With that being said, all enterprise funds continue to have a healthy fund balance. There are rate increases in our stormwater rates. Transfers to general fund enterprise funds will be at $920,000 in 2026. When you include HUC, that's just over $2.8 million. I think it's roughly about 5% of our general fund. That's not including HUC money. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our capital improvement fund. This is our budget source that pays for the large capital items within the city. So that's your streets, your buildings, your playgrounds, your vehicles, all come out of this fund. This is our 5-year CIP. On average, we're looking at about, I want to say that it's probably about 14 million a year. You see a large increase in 2027. That's in expectation and hoping we're getting some state funding to do the HAS facility. For those of you who've been on the council, I think that first started in 22 or 23, and that keeps getting pushed back because we can't get help from the state. Now I know they're looking at revisiting that and whether or not that'll be something we get funding for. When you look at the 5-year CIP, where are those projects taking place? Roughly 32% of that is within our infrastructure. So that's your just over 23 million. That's going to new construction of your roads, reclaims, partial reconstruction, pavement management, seal coating. Another 32% is for our enterprise funds. So that's improvements to the water plant, the wastewater plant, the liquor store, Creekside. Another 19%, just under 14 million, is in public works. So that's improvements to the airport, cemetery, some of the engineering that we may have to do, buildings and vehicle improvements. Roughly 10% of that goes to Park and Rec. That's improvements to the pool, rec center, civic arena, our various different parks, including playgrounds and the library. Public safety, that'd be improvements to facilities and vehicles for the police, fire, and building inspections. And then general government, that would be any admin or technology needs or improvements we have in the next 5 years, improvements to this building, the city center. And where does it come from? It comes from various different sources. Roughly 30% of our CIP, we get money from state and federal dollars. Maybe a lot of it's the airport or streets, or we may have grants and donations. Another 26% comes from the user fees that people are charging for water, wastewater, liquor, Creekside. About 20% of that is being borrowed. So whether that's a wastewater plant or street improvement projects. About 12% of that is property taxes, help to make those improvements, and that's not necessarily new property taxes. That may be property taxes that were levied in the past that were set aside in special funds. And then about 5% is assessments. So we are directly charging property owners that are adjacent to certain streets when we're doing improvements for a portion of those costs. Some of that's a requirement when it comes to bonding. And our ability to bond is that you have to assess a certain portion of it to get bonding. So that's a portion that falls into that. You see right now there's about 6% that's unfunded. That's about 4.3 million. A good portion of that is the HATS facility that we've talked about. There's no money set aside right now for that. And then we've talked about the need for new flooring at the east and west rink, at the ice arena. That's farther out on the CIP, and we're maybe hoping that sales tax will help cover that, but that's a significant need. So those are kind of two of the bigger projects that are currently in the unfunded, but they're listed on our CIP plan. Things that were not in the CIP that have been in the years past, we have removed the splash pad and the pickleball courts. Those are not included in the current 5-year CIP. So I know that comes up from time to time in the public, and I just want to make that clear. So this is just next year. Okay, what are we looking to spend that money on? I think it's, once again, it's about 14.8 million. And so next year we have improvements to mainly our water and wastewater plant. That's the enterprise fund. Infrastructure next year, street projects. You'll hear about this on Tuesday, but Edmonton Avenue, and then there's a portion on Larson, Bradford, Orchard, Sherwood, Elks, that area. That's probably the street project, the big street projects for next year. Public Works, just over 1.3 million. Those improvements to the airport cemetery, a lot of its vehicles and equipment. Just over $1 million to Park and Rec. A good portion of that is playgrounds, upgrades to a campground. We have the outdoor basketball courts are included next year. You may recall we have a significant private donation that's looking to come in on that. Hasn't been approved yet, but it's in the plan for next year. And then public safety, a big portion of that is our next payment for the fire truck. That'll be due next year. And then we have some squad car replacements, and there's actually a police robot is factored in the budget for next year. And then also next year is the early stage planning documents for the city center improvements. This is our debt plan. It's just kind of the highlights where we're at today, and with the current debt obligations that are in place, what that looks like over the next roughly 10 years. This yellow, that's the police station that we borrowed for a couple of years ago. The blue, most of that is our existing levy. Most of that has to do with our street and road improvement projects in the years to come. So as I wrap this up, just kind of want to do just a quick summary. This is what we're looking at for proposed levies that will be taken to the council later this month. Once again, we're looking at an 8.6% general fund tax levy increase, along with a 2.5% debt fund increase, with an overall city tax levy increase of 6.9%. That's down 2.3% from the preliminary budget that was established in September in the tax levy. You can see kind of where those cuts came from, with the EDA and HRA remaining at the same. So overall, you're looking at a 6.7% tax levy increase that the council has some sort of control over. I always like to see our portion of that is really that 6.9% general fund, or total city tax, which is that general fund, debt fund, combined. Once again, this is summary information. For next year, with the proposed budget, you're looking at just over 16.6 million in revenue that are offset with just over 16.6 million in general fund expenses. That's a 5.7% increase. Highlighting once again those tax levy increases for next year. So the biggest factor behind a levy increase, it's one of the main factors of why my tax is going up. Most of that has to do with general wage and benefit increases, along with a couple of additional positions that are expected to cost us just over $676,000. As we shared time in and time again, 68% of our expenses are the employees that we have here at the city. And so some of this is adding new employees, and some of that is just the regular performance increases that are associated with, which on average is anywhere from about 4 to 4.5% increase over the last couple of years. Just some additional information on the budget. 2026 budget includes an additional IT staff position, the water, park, rec building position, the engineering and public works staffing changes. Proposed budget for 2026 includes no other significant increases or cuts in staffing or services or changes in service. 2026 budget includes a 14% increase in health insurance costs and new costs from Minnesota Paid Family Medical Leave. Staffing costs and capital needs continue to be the biggest drivers of our budget. Major capital improvements are needed at the pool and the ice arena. We've been talking about that. Fund balances continue to remain high, and the fiscal condition of the city is healthy. I would say we come here presenting this budget in a position of strength. I think our general fund balance is about 54% of our projected expenses for next year. Well within the guidelines that we've established as a council, wanting to make sure we're at least 50%. The state's budget forecast isn't great and could have an impact in the future years. They released today the most recent update. It's good and bad. Surplus for next year is budgeted at 2.5, or projected at 2.5 billion, but the next biennium you're looking at a $3 billion deficit. So I don't know completely what that means for us as a city right now. I think in the short term, we're not expecting any impacts in next year's budget on behalf of the state. But I don't know what to say after next year. And obviously the legislature has some work to do in regards to that. But right now it's not having an impact on our proposed budget and tax levies. Home values continue to increase, and the city is continuing to see growth at all levels. That includes, multifamily, commercial, industrial. Like I said, we had a higher than expected year when it came to construction activity this past year, and 2026 is looking to do that once again. So a lot of information that I just went through in just under an hour. So I don't expect you to remember every single detail, but we're at that portion of it where you guys have listened to me enough to where, are there any additional questions from the council members and or the public? And Mayor, I guess I'll hand it over to you on whether or not there's any feedback from the council members, and otherwise you can open it up for any public discussion or questions.
Got anything else for Matt? No. About the public, do you have any questions for Matt? No? Well, Matt, you must did a good job because nobody's got questions.
I do my best. So, a couple things. Just a reminder: the council approved the final budgets and levies at the December 23rd City Council meeting. You maybe heard in the last couple of days we've had some changeover or some anticipated changeover in our police department. We're looking at that right now. That may actually have a positive impact on our budget for next year. It's a challenge. It's nothing major. We've got, I think, 2 retirements that are coming up. One that's already retired, another one that's coming up in early next year, and then we just recently heard that one of our sergeants is moving. So we have 3 vacancies, and that will have a slight impact. So we might have some minor changes which would be on the positive. It won't be a significant change, but we may be able to save, I think, $20,000-$30,000 that we may be looking to update our budget before our second meeting here in December. So, and then we have to certify our final levies by the end of the month. So,
when are we going to hire that new IT person?
I think we have it in the budget. If it gets approved by the council, we would start recruitment in January. So you're probably looking at March. And do we have a March hire yet?
Factors in March 1st.
Sure.
Knowing there's usually a delay.
Yep.
And I told the mayor no, but the fire inspector position, did that get filled?
Yes.
Okay,
He started after Labor Day in September.
okay.
There's no other questions or comments. Like I said, I've got my email up there. I would encourage, if you're watching on TV, feel free to reach out to us if you're looking for any additional information. Otherwise, Mary, you guys are welcome to conclude the public hearing. So,
Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion by Chad, second by Tim to adjourn. Any other discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries.